Okay, so they only took one factor in account, which was the monozygotic twins. But you can imagine if you would have taken in account, or the researchers, like things like anorexia nervosa, AD, Alzheimer's disease, MS, any particular expression of the syphilitic miasm, any destructive disease, the percentage would have been much higher even. But even without that, it was actually really revealing, and therefore the genetic therapy or the genetic theory behind it was definitely coming to the foreground. And it's not completely gone, even though, still there's every month almost comes another study out with new genetic markers. The interesting thing of that is too, as much as they found them, and they found several ones, not just one, and I think that creates the confusion, because they really can tell the answer to when do we have enough genetic markers, or do we find common ones, so that we can say this is the common pathological mechanism that we are looking for. Right? When this is present, we can be sure that autism will be present. They can actually even answer that. They have no idea, and that's not uncommon, because when we look at other diseases like cystic fibrosis, well, we have like 80 different genes that are involved in it, 80. So, and yet we look at this disease like cystic fibrosis, no matter if they all discovered them, it hasn't brought any particularly therapeutic result from it. Okay, and that is in general. So in other words, the sad thing is, although the genetic theory for sure until the year 2000 was completely to the foreground, and even people would still now put that first, they're still looking for genes that are involved. But the strangest thing is, if you look back on the 30 years genetic research that we have been doing, then so far not one therapeutic gesture has come from it, not one, in any disease, never mind autism. I mean, it makes it strange that always parents too, unfortunately, always count on this is going to be the solution for my child. Okay? In the year 2000 something changed, because as much as the genome, the whole composition and the DNA, at that point what they really extended in the gene theory was what they call epigenetics at this point. Epigenetics, literally translated as beyond genetics. What it really, and it's very interesting because for us as homeopaths or traditional Chinese medicine, both have many things in common, by the way. But for us it was very interesting because what they then claimed, epigenetics that is, was absolutely getting it closer to what our theory is, and so what traditional Chinese medicine, 5,000 years already, what that is. So it's interesting for us because we can now use many allopathic scientific studies. We can use it to confirm actually our theories, and that's the beauty of it. In other words, as much as they might say it's placebo effect, we actually can use their own scientific research now to explain and to actually confirm the miasmatic theory, triggers, whatsoever. So when this epigenetic theory, what it came down to was the fact that now environmental factors, as they called, and again I have to say, they were concentrating more on exterior environment rather than exterior and interior, which homeopathy does, which traditional Chinese medicine does. And we have to get back to that. But so they really focus on exterior ones, exterior environmental factors, even what they call, chemical factors, especially, what they can, environmental chemical products that will actually know what they call turn off the gene. In other words, the genes are all present there. The DNA sequence stays the same, but the thing is, are they all active? In other words, here, the exterior environmental factors, and of course the interior too, but that's not something that is very well taken in account in allopathy in these studies. But the exterior environmental factors, just like even arsenic, even toxins, right? So, I mean, anything like this, because they can measure it, I think that's why they really favor it versus emotions, the interior environmental factor, hard to measure, very elusive for allopathy, not for us. So what it does, they really found this, and it's very interesting because it does confirm our miasmatic homeopathic theory too. It can turn off genes, switch it off, turn off and on. But even turning off, even to, depending on the intensity, the duration of the trigger, I would say, even damage the gene. Okay, so this is really a big step forwards, and I think a good step forwards even of allopathy, to look at epigenetics, which is very much accepted completely again in biology, you know, the sister science of medicine. And more obviously even in excellent universities, medical studies and everything, that this is indeed the thing they do. Makes completely sense to me. So in other words, this is interesting how they found, and that's why they called it epigenetics, beyond genetics, is that even when genes get turned off and turned on again, it doesn't change the sequence of DNA. So that stayed the same, and that's what originally what was baffling, of course, right? Because they thought, well, this is consistent, this doesn't change, the sequence doesn't change, so we can't look there. Now they realize they have to. And when you think about it, the turning off of the genes or the turning on, it really completely correlates with what we have, the miasms, when we talk about the dormant miasm, latent miasm, and that any particular factor, as Hahnemann said, diet included, even as much as a dietary mistake, can actually turn on, or we called it, you know, waken up the miasm. Now, for us, it's the same thing as here now, what epigenetics says, turn off the gene, and just, you know, you can imagine if this happens with a child during a period that is very important, during a very important period of development, when it happens during that time, and it's hard. So, and this is where the problem is for allopathy, then the whole development has been arrested to some extent. Of course, what they don't do, and this is when I studied now the last years, all the books and the research that has been done in allopathy, basically because it does help us as homeopaths to really confirm our own theories and to look where allopathy goes, if there's any particular answers. But the bottom line is, I have never found in any of those studies, in the allopathic scientific studies, I never found that they take in consideration factors pre-conception, at the conception, at the moment of conception, during the pregnancy, during the delivery, but only mainly after the conception. Okay, so they really always look at what is the first 2 years of this particular children, what happened, what are the triggers, which is kind of strange, you know, because it really is an innate disease. In other words, this happens much more, and with the epigenetics it makes more sense. Even in allopathy, they say that the first 24 days of after the conception are extremely crucial for the development of the child, and extremely crucial if any particular factor is going to be turning off these genes. The first 24 days are absolutely very important. So they really know this. Why they really then don't look at this, and I wouldn't have to say that they never did, because in the 60s they actually did. Strangely enough, 1960, 1970, like Dr. Vernon is an excellent doctor who wrote the book The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. They really talked about indeed the emotions intra-utero, how it would really have an influence, you know, how they try to link this to the child with autism. Why it really disappeared, like I said, it did go to then to the genetic therapy theory, and now it's the external environment, not the internal. Nobody talks about emotions, not at all. Now they talk about emotions after the delivery, after birth. In other words, they say, well, you know, these children, because the mothers and fathers get upset after, it makes sense, because if you see all these children and you have the families with you, it is a very hard job for the mother and father, especially for the moms. And so they say, well, see, it comes afterwards. They get influenced by the environment that's created, because the parents are upset that they have an autistic child, you know, they can't deal with it all, they get tired, they get overworked, they get overwhelmed. In other words, they get in a sepia state, and they can't deal with it. So, and that creates then further problems. That it does do that, there's no doubt about that.